Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you. In today's episode, Bill's going to start off by talking a little bit about fertility as it pertains to your garden plots.
Well, welcome back to In a Nutshell. This is Bill Brush again. Today I want to talk about gardening, and when it comes to fertility, I like to say, we'll call this what plants need in the way of fertility. And I'm going to kind of hop over a couple of very important nutrients.
Calcium and magnesium are first on Bill's docket for today's episode.
Calcium and magnesium. And you need calcium and magnesium for several different things, but you better get your ratio, and I hate using the word ratio because people take it the wrong way, but you need a certain amount of calcium to be married up with a certain amount of magnesium. The heavier the clay, the less magnesium. The sandier the soil, the more magnesium, on a percentage basis, not on a total pounds basis. So when I talk about these, it becomes very important, and I've talked about that in other podcasts. It's really important to understand, because without the proper amount of calcium to the proper amount of magnesium, what you get is you either get too much air and not enough magnesium to hold your soil together, or you get too much magnesium and not enough calcium and you pull it together. Either way are not good, but the one where you don't have enough calcium, you don't create enough porosity, you don't create enough airspace, and whether your garden or anything you try to grow will not do it nearly as well, because they aren't able to get a great microbiology and a great active soil that's very, very mineralizing and releasing nutrients to your plant, so your plants takes up and the plants are able to thrive in these nice, beautiful, balanced soils. The other thing too is that magnesium is really important for the production in photosynthesis of chlorophyll. It's the center of the chlorophyll molecule. So if you are short of magnesium, well, you're going to have a hard time growing green plants, aren't you? And if you have not enough calcium, you're not going to have the ability to fill cells in the vacuole of that cells with calcium, and then glue cells together with calcium pectate. So you have a lot of issues, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, because it's a given that you need to get the proper amount of calcium with the proper amount of magnesium back and forth. They're what I call the cation twins. They are work together, but they're really working against each other all the time. But you need them together to get your best results from your plant. So now we'll get into fertility with what other people. I like to talk those first two, calcium, magnesium, as being the amending or the structure of soil and building it, even though they are a necessary nutrient for the plant. But getting them in the proper percentages for your soil type will give you enough of those nutrients to do the job you need.
Bill's now briefly going to go over nitrogen.
Nutrient I'll talk a little bit about is nitrogen, and this will be really short but kind of succinct in every one of these, and understanding why it's important when I'm trying to grow my garden. And most everybody's understanding that nitrogen is a nutrient that I need to feed my plants, okay? And one of the things about calcium, magnesium, if I get those in proper amounts for each other, nitrogen becomes more efficient, and I'll get more nitrogen into the plant and won't need near as much, because what I put on will get at a real much higher rate. It'll be very, very efficient. Plants take up two forms of nitrogen. One's ammonium, is a nitrogen and hydrogen blend, and the other is a nitrate, which is nitrogen and oxygen, because one is positively charged and one is negatively charged. The clay is negatively charged, so it will hold on to the ammonium, but nitrogen will be released. So if we're using a lot of nitrogen and pouring water through there, a lot of times our plants don't have an opportunity to really pick it up. So you're wasting a lot of nitrogen. The other thing you have to be careful, in cold temperatures, ammonium won't convert to nitrate, and you can get ammonium toxicity, but you can also get ammonium into the plant at higher rates than it really wants, and it'll go to a vegetative crop that you're trying to grow into a seed crop. It's going to reproduce. And that's because ammonium nitrogen will make the plant grow reproductively, while nitrate will make it grow vegetatively. The next one that we look at, and if you ever look at a fertilizer tag on a bag, it'll always start with numbers, and that first one being nitrogen, second one being phosphate, third one being potassium and sulfur, and on down the line. So we're going right through kind of the way you would find them on a fertilizer label.
Now Bill's going to move on to talking about phosphate.
A phosphate is really one that's undervalued in a lot of cases. It's extremely important for root development, and the way I like to say is when you plant a plant in your garden and you don't have enough phosphate, you will struggle to have a good crop or good production from your plants, because you need good roots to grow good plants. And if you think of it another way, if the crop I'm trying to grow is a root crop, like a carrot, like a turnip, like a beet, anything that grows, potatoes is another one, all of these in the ground are that you're harvesting the root part, well, you better keep your phosphate level up. And a lot of the podcasts previously will give you an idea from soil sample where they should fall on your soil test to say you have excellent levels. But the best way I always talk about phosphate, whether it's seeded or transplant, is you want that phosphate early and often, small amounts often, because if not, it's got to go out and harvest it out of a phosphate that's tied up in the soil around you, and it'll put out some root acids to dissolve, and then harvest that, and then root flush around it and harvest some more. But in the meantime, if we've got a nice available phosphate close to those roots, it will pick it up, and your plants will be off and running. It's also extremely important in two very important functions in plant, which is photosynthesis and respiration. And everybody knows that photosynthesis is basically making glucose or making sugar from carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight. And so when you do that, it goes down to the roots, restores them, and does that. Respiration is a little less known, but if you're short of phosphate and you don't have enough to do the proper respiration, what it does is starts to slow your plant down, because it needs phosphate to harvest, and not really harvest, but mineralize and turn all of that glucose and sugars through a series called the Krebs cycle. It will take that and make it into energy, and it uses a massive amount of energy to grow. And so if you don't have enough, it'll shut that plant down. What it'll do is you'll notice it by having smaller pinched leaves, and you're never going to have the size plant to produce the kind of volume and size and quality if you don't have enough phosphate.
Now Bill's going to move on to talking about potassium.
Next we have potassium, which is one that everybody thinks they would like to have plenty of. It's a really expensive nutrient of most of the ones because of the volume you need to have it in your soil. Most good soils on a soil test, you'd like it up around 5 to 7.5%. The sandier the soil, the more potassium you need on a percentage basis, but you're going to need 400 or 500 pounds of actual potassium in that soil per acre to do you a really good job. But it's really important for any type of I always call it limb strength or stalk strength or branch strength. Whatever you're growing is going to be weakened if you're deficient in potassium. It will also not do your transpiration properly because it doesn't exchange water and gases like it should, because you don't have enough to work your guard cells properly to exchange gases. So therefore, it's one that will slow things down too, and it'll fight to work properly because you don't have enough potassium. It also has several other functions, but I want you to at least remember, I need to grow a strong plant. If I'm going to grow corn, I better have some potassium, because that's got to support something that's at least 6 to 8 foot tall, and therefore it's got to have some stalk strength in that bottom so that it's not going over, not breaking over and falling over and not being able to mature.
Now Bill's moving on to sulfur.
Next is sulfur. If you like sweet things, like sweet fruit, or you like your tomatoes to be really sweet, or you like your melons to be really sweet, sulfur is really necessary. One of the things it does is it makes your nitrogen about 10% more efficient. So you can put on less nitrogen if you've got plenty of sulfur. One of the things you need to know about sulfur is that the plant needs sulfate sulfur, but if you put on elemental, it'll need to go through some processes to convert it from a single S to an S with oxygen, or a sulfate, SO4. And when it gets to SO4, it becomes leachable. So sulfur is something that you should be adding into your program every year because it's going to move out of the root zone. Now, if you have a closed-in box type of soil, and you keep working the bottom to the top and the bottom to the top, you're going to be able to recycle this. But don't forget, you always have to put enough on to take care of the removal of whatever crop, whether it's nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, or sulfur, calcium, magnesium. You're pulling those out. You have to put back how much you're removing, or you're beginning to bankrupt you because you're taking more nutrients out than you're putting in, and eventually you will be so short that you will have to invest a lot of effort and money to get it up to the level that'll perform very well. The other thing about sulfur, when I talk about sweetness, a lot of fruits, and that includes some in the vegetable world, which we also call fruits, or berries. One of the things that you want is you want some storability. And if you're short of sulfur, one of the things you're going to find is my produce doesn't last very long. I picked it yesterday, and 2 days later it's soft and fallen apart. With the proper amount of sulfur, you're forming complex sugars and carbohydrates, and because of that, they have a longer shelf life. And you'll notice it, and I see it a lot in what I call stone fruits, the peaches, apricots, cherries. All of these things have a longer shelf life if I've grown them using the proper amounts of sulfur, and they'll be better to the taste and flavor. And I think everyone will rave about how good they taste because of how well they have balanced out that sugar, and not just having the very, very simple sugars that ferment and then rot over fairly easy time, because those simple sugars, will attract bacteria and fungi, and then they will feed off that simple sugar, and that's what forms alcohol. And the first thing you have fruit that is unusable.
Now Bill's going to get into talking a little bit about micronutrients.
The next thing I'll talk about, is micronutrients. And every crop you grow needs every one of the nutrients I talk about in some quantity. If you're going to grow something that grows tall and needs a lot of strength, then obviously I need more potassium in that. If I have something that I need a really massive amount of root growth, then I need something that's got more phosphate in. And nitrogen, if I can use these things, I can judiciously put on just the right amount of nitrogen to get the performance I want. Same way with sulfur. The micronutrients are all needed too, because there are biological functions in all plants that these are essential for. I know a lot of people will eat spinach because it's got a lot of iron in it. And anytime you think of iron, think of something that's a super, super dark forest green leaf-wise. That's something that more than likely, and it has a lot to do with the chlorophyll molecule and the density that they puts iron into it. And so iron is necessary for all things, but spinach will mine out what it needs out of the soil. Most of the time there's a lot of iron there, but we want to make sure there's enough available iron. And you got things like manganese, and a lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to it. But if you're growing something that needs to also have some standability, it's necessary to get manganese into that plant to form lignin. And lignin is what keeps cells hard and tight and makes them strong so that they don't break over. Your sweet corn, without proper amounts of manganese, if you're deficient, extremely deficient, you'll find a little wind comes up and they all break over down at the ground level. That's usually a function of manganese, okay? The next one I thought, and just little bits, these are things that you can add in terms of foliar. They're really good because you don't need a lot, but it's something that you can look at a lot of, and they really are, if they're well made, will be their uptake will be really well. They're usually always chelated well to be taken up by plants and get into that tissue so that you can get the proper functions in the plant. Next one I was going to talk about is copper. And copper is like plants' natural fungicide. And when we see plants that have trouble with fungal diseases, and those could be root diseases, fruit on your fruit, they could be on your plants, higher mildew levels, all these things can be helped with good, proper nutrition with enough copper to get into that plant to make it more resilient to stress. So it'll fight off fungal diseases. It'll fight off stress diseases. In other words, when you have enough copper and you put it under heat stress, you put it under water stress, the first thing you'll find is the ones that have those higher copper numbers will come out of that much better than before. So it gives it resiliency to any problem it may find. In other words, you'll see a lot of times where a plant will have so much weight that it will bend over, but it won't break. And as soon as the weight's been removed, it'll spring back up. That's a good sign that you have plenty of copper. The next is zinc. And zinc is something that people talk a lot about, but I like to talk about. It's the distributor. If you're low of zinc, you have a hard time distributing nutrients all throughout the plant. And that's why the symptoms are stunted leaves and stunted growth points and what we call rosetting, which is a lot of little leaves trying to come out of one spot, and not good movement because the zinc is so low that it's not allowing the nutrients necessary for growth, calcium, magnesium, nitrogen, phosphorus, all of them to move out on your shoots. So it shortens things up quite a bit. So it becomes real important. Another one I like to talk about too is boron. It is very toxic in higher amounts, particularly with low calcium, but a very necessary, particularly if you're looking something you're going to be harvesting either the fruit or the reproductive part of the plant, because it's very necessary for seed production. And so if you don't have a proper amount of boron, both early in the season for pollination and getting good fertilization of the flowers so that we grow tomatoes and melons and things that really are fruitful, that's what you're trying to do with that. And the other thing that works hand in hand with it is manganese. Manganese is essential for that set of seed. In other words, you may see tomatoes a lot of times that they'll come out, they'll put tons of flowers off, but the flowers fall off. A lot of times it can be as simple as low manganese because it's not setting the fruit. It may have got pollinated, but it doesn't have enough manganese to form the enzymes and coenzymes that it needs to actually hold on to those plants. So you have a couple other real small micronutrients, cobalt, molybdenum. Again, they're in the efficiency stage where they can really help a plant pick up and distribute nutrients throughout the plant. It's a really good micronutrient defoliar because it takes such a small amount. And to try to get it up in the soil is a little bit harder. It's doable. There are plants like sodium molybdate and another one for cobalt that you can actually apply in certain amounts and actually build the level up. And that's nice if you want to, but it's not essential at this point. So we talked a lot about the different nutrients today. And one of the things I wanted to also go by, in addition to nutrients, timing is essentially how you get the best results. Better quality plants, healthier plants grown in healthier soils will give you fruit and vegetables that will be resistant pests because they're able to fend for themselves and fight off. I know in my experience as a consultant, I've walked many fields, and the weakest plants are where you'll start to see insects flock to first. So if you have things like mites or aphids or whatever, they will be going to the weakest plants first. And then you'll see them show up all over. So they're just like the canary in a coal mine. They are just an indication that you're going to have problems. But the healthier we have all of our plants, the more that they're able to put off a lot of natural, I hate to use the word pesticide, but they actually put off things that will repel insects. And so that by definition is a pesticide. And it'll actually keep them off of your plants while your plants continue to develop. So remember that All of these, when you apply them, will be very, very instrumental. And probably down the road, I'll talk some more about why we put on nutrients at what time. I talked about phosphate today, early and often. Nitrogen, we start early up to a point where we've got that fruit or vegetable where we want it, and then we cut off and let it lean back to harvest. So when you get to tree crops, it's a little bit different animal, but that's not for today. Hopefully this is going to be helpful with the different nutrients that all plants need and getting them to them in the proper way with the proper soil, balanced, mineralized, and then ready really to give you an outstanding chance at growing a great garden. So until next time, we'll talk about gardening again.
Thanks for another fantastic episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm sure everyone really appreciated what you had to say about all the different nutrients and how they play into growing your garden. Make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and always stay curious.